Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. This is my story, one I never thought I'd share, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it. What happened to me changed everything I believed in about love, trust, and betrayal. So here it goes. The email notification pinged on her laptop, innocuously enough. It was a Tuesday, I think. Just a regular, run-of-the-mill Tuesday, the kind that usually fades into the background noise of life. We were in the living room, Sarah, my wife, ostensibly studying for her upcoming finals, and I was half watching some game on TV, half scrolling through my phone. The laptop was on the coffee table, open to her university portal. I didn't mean to look, not really. But the subject line caught my eye, even upside down from where I was sitting. Something about grade submission query, Professor Davies. My heart didn't do a drum roll. No alarm bells went off. Why would they? This was Sarah, my Sarah. The woman I'd built my world around. The woman whose dreams I'd practically tattooed onto my own soul. I just idly wondered if she was having trouble with a grade. But then she lunged for the laptop, a swift, almost panicked movement, slamming it shut with a sharp click that echoed in the sudden silence of the room. Her face, when she looked up at me, was flushed. "Just spam," she mumbled, avoiding my gaze. Spam. That's what she said. And like a fool, a trusting, loving fool, I nodded and went back to my game. But that little scene, that tiny, awkward moment, it was like a splinter, lodged just beneath the surface. It didn't hurt right away, but it was there, a foreign object in the otherwise smooth landscape of our life. And it would fester. Oh, it would fester. Looking back, that was the first thread. The first tiny thread in the unraveling of everything I held dear, everything I'd worked for, everything I believed us to be. I paid for my wife's college degree, every single penny, and she thanked me by sleeping with her professor. That's not the start of the story, not really. That's the punchline to a joke I never saw coming. The real story, the one that grinds you down, is in the details, in the before, in the during. We met young. I was 22, fresh out of trade school, working as an apprentice electrician, full of piss and vinegar and dreams of building a future. Sarah was 19, a waitress at a local diner I frequented for their greasy breakfasts and endless coffee. She had a smile that could melt glaciers and eyes that seemed to see right into you, not in an unnerving way, but like she understood things without you having to say them. We fell hard and fast. Classic story, right? Boy meets girl, they fall in love, they talk about white picket fences and 2.5 kids. For a while, that was us. We married 2 years later, a small ceremony with close friends and family. I remember standing at that altar, looking at her in her simple white dress, and feeling like the luckiest man alive. My chest physically ached with how much I loved her. We didn't have much money, but we had each other, and that felt like enough. I worked hard, pulling extra shifts, taking on side jobs. My hands were always calloused, my body often tired, but I was driven to provide for her, for us. Sarah worked too, still waitressing, then a stint in retail. She often talked about wanting more, about feeling unfulfilled. She was smart, incredibly so. She'd devour books, engage in conversations about topics that went way over my head sometimes. But I loved listening to her. Loved that spark in her eyes when she was passionate about something. About 5 years into our marriage, she brought up the idea of going to college. She wanted to be a teacher, she said, to make a difference. It was a noble dream, and I saw how much it meant to her. The problem was, of course, money. We were comfortable, thanks to my now established electrical contracting business, but we weren't rolling in it. College, even a state university, was a huge expense. Tuition, books, living expenses if she couldn't work as much. I remember us sitting at our small kitchen table, papers spread out, calculators clicking. Her face was a mixture of hope and anxiety. I looked at her, at this woman who was my everything, and I made a decision. A decision that, at the time, felt like the most natural, most loving thing in the world. We'll make it work, I told her. You go to school. I'll cover it. The relief that washed over her face, the way her eyes welled up with tears of gratitude, that was my reward. That was all I needed. So that's what we did. Sarah enrolled in a 4-year program at the state university, about an hour's drive away. I ramped up my business. I took on every contract I could, worked weekends, late nights. My days started before sunrise and ended long after sunset. I ran the numbers constantly, budgeting, cutting back on our personal expenses. My old truck, Betsy, which was already on her last legs, I kept coaxing along with duct tape and prayers because a new vehicle was an unjustifiable expense. Vacations became a distant memory. Date nights transformed into her studying at the table while I reviewed blueprints or invoices nearby. Just to be in the same room. It wasn't easy. There were times I was so tired I could barely see straight. Times when the financial pressure felt like a physical weight on my chest. But then Sarah would come home, full of stories about her classes, her eyes shining with excitement about a new concept she'd learned, or a particularly inspiring lecture. She'd share her assignments, her essays, and I'd listen, offering my layman support, feeling a swell of pride. My wife, the college student. My wife, the future teacher. I was investing in her, yes, but I truly believed I was investing in us, in our future. A future where she was fulfilled and happy, which in turn would make us stronger. I'd imagine her in a classroom, shaping young minds, and I'd feel this incredible sense of accomplishment, almost as if I were achieving it with her. I never once resented the sacrifice. Not for a second. I saw it as a partnership. My role was to provide the foundation, the support, so she could soar. And she was soaring, academically at least. She made the dean's list every semester. Her professors loved her, she said. She was always talking about one in particular, a Professor Davies. He taught her literature courses, her favorite subject. He's brilliant, Mark, she'd say. The way he dissects a text, it's like he unlocks a whole new world. I'd nod, smile, genuinely happy for her that she had such engaging mentors. Professor Davies. The name just rolled off her tongue, familiar, frequent. I pictured him as some old, tweed-wearing academic, probably with elbow patches on his jackets and a pipe. The kind of harmless intellectual type. How wrong I was. The naivety is almost laughable now, in a bitter, hollow kind of way. The years passed. 4 of them. For years of grinding, of sacrificing, of pouring every spare cent and every ounce of my energy into her education. There were strains, of course. Less time together. Sometimes she'd stay late at the university to study at the library or work on group projects. Sometimes, especially in her final year, she seemed more distant, more stressed. I chalked it up to academic pressure, the impending finals, the job hunt for a teaching position. We talked less about us and more about her future career. I told myself it was temporary. Once she graduated, once she had her degree and her job, things would go back to normal. We'd reconnect. We'd finally get to enjoy the fruits of our collective labor. I was so focused on the finish line, on her success, that I missed the subtle shifts, the growing distance that wasn't just physical. Or maybe I didn't miss them. Maybe a part of me saw them, felt them, but chose to ignore them, terrified that acknowledging them would make them real, would threaten the picture of the future I had so carefully constructed and so heavily invested in. It's easier to blame stress and academic pressure than to confront the possibility that the person you're sacrificing everything for is slowly, deliberately, moving away from you, creating a separate world you're not a part of. The sacrifices I made weren't just financial. They were emotional. They were about time, about shared experiences we missed. I poured myself into her dream, believing it was our dream. And as graduation approached, my pride was immense. My wife, soon to be a college graduate. Our hard work, our sacrifices, were about to pay off. That's what I thought. That's what I truly, wholeheartedly believed, right up until that innocuous Tuesday afternoon and a slammed laptop lid. The incident with the laptop, her spam excuse, it did plant a seed of unease, though. A tiny, almost imperceptible seed. But it was there. Over the next few weeks, leading up to her graduation, I found myself watching her more closely. Not in an accusatory way, or at least I hope not, but with a new, unwelcome layer of awareness. She seemed more protective of her phone, angling it away from me when she texted. There were more late-night study sessions, sometimes with a new vagueness about who they were with or where exactly they were happening. If I questioned her, even gently, she'd get defensive, accusing me of not trusting her after all this time, after all she was doing to build a better future for us. That was her go-to line, for us. It was a shield she used, and it worked, mostly. Because what could I say? I was the one who pushed for this, who enabled it. Questioning it felt like questioning my own judgment, my own sacrifices. And the guilt, the fear of being the unsupportive husband, was a powerful silencer. I remember one evening, she came home smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine. It was a subtle scent, something expensive and musky, definitely not the cheap body spray some college kid would wear. I asked her about it, casually, trying to keep my tone light. "Oh, I think one of the guys in my study group wears something like that," she said, barely looking up from her phone. The smell probably just clung to my clothes in the library. It was plausible. Barely. But my gut, that long-ignored instinct, was starting to churn. The problem is, when you've invested so much, when you've bet your entire future on someone, on a shared dream, the idea of that investment being worthless, of that dream being a lie, is too catastrophic to contemplate. So you rationalize. You make excuses for them. You tell yourself you're being paranoid. You cling to the picture you painted because the alternative is a blank canvas, or worse, a canvas defaced beyond recognition. And I was an expert at rationalizing by then. I had to be. My whole world depended on it. But the cracks were forming, hairline fractures at first, but spreading, unseen, beneath the surface of our carefully constructed life. The earthquake was coming. I just didn't know it yet. I was too busy planning her graduation party, too busy feeling proud, too busy being a fool. The graduation day itself was a blur of false smiles and a heavy, unspoken tension that only I seemed to feel. Sarah was radiant, of course, in her cap and gown. Our families were there, beaming with pride. My parents, especially, kept patting me on the back, telling me what a good husband I was, how much I'd done for her. Each word of praise felt like a small stab, a reminder of my own oblivious investment. I remember watching her walk across that stage to receive her diploma, the culmination of 4 years of my life as much as hers. And in that moment, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. There was pride, yes, a stubborn, lingering pride. But underneath it, there was a cold dread, a sickening premonition that this wasn't the victory I had envisioned. This was something else. Something that was about to detonate the life I knew. During the reception afterwards, I saw her talking animatedly with Professor Davies. He wasn't the old, tweedy academic I'd pictured. He was younger, maybe early 40s, handsome in a rugged, intellectual sort of way, with a confident air about him. He had his hand on her arm, a little too familiarly, laughing at something she said. She looked up at him with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in a long, long time. An expression of admiration, of something more. My stomach twisted. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just a grateful student and her mentor. But the seed of doubt, watered by the laptop incident, the cologne, the defensiveness, was now a rapidly growing weed, choking the life out of my carefully tended garden of denial. That night, after the guests had left, after the congratulatory calls had ended, after the house fell silent, the real silence began. A silence filled with unspoken words, with questions I was too afraid to ask, and answers I was terrified to hear. The degree was framed, ready to be hung on the wall, a testament to her hard work and my blind devotion. The price for that piece of paper was far higher than I ever imagined, and the bill was about to come due. I should have trusted my gut sooner, much sooner. That nagging feeling, the one I kept swatting away like an annoying fly, it was trying to tell me something. But I was the king of justifications, the emperor of it's probably nothing. Because facing the alternative meant admitting that the life I poured my blood, sweat, and savings into was built on a foundation of lies. Sarah had been more distant in the months leading up to it, not just busy with her studies, which I'd expected, but emotionally unavailable. Our conversations became transactional, focused on her schedule, her deadlines, her anxieties about exams. The easy intimacy we once shared, the comfortable silences, the inside jokes, they all seemed to evaporate, replaced by a polite, almost formal courtesy. She'd often stay late at the university, claiming study groups or library sessions. Sometimes she'd come home smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine, a sophisticated, woody scent that was definitely not something a broke college student would wear. When I'd ask, she'd have a plausible explanation ready. Oh, we were at a cafe near campus. It must have been someone there. Or the library was packed. You pick up all sorts of smells. Plausible, yes. But the frequency started to gnaw at me. Her phone became an extension of her hand, always angled away from me, notifications silenced. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she'd quickly flip it over or slide it into her pocket. Little things, right? Things you could easily dismiss as stress, as her being engrossed in her demanding academic life. And I wanted to dismiss them. God, how I wanted to. I'd spent 4 years working myself to the bone, putting my own needs, my own desires on the back burner, all to see her achieve this dream. Our dream, or so I thought. The idea that she could betray me, was so monstrous, so out of character for the Sarah I knew or thought I knew, that my mind simply refused to entertain it. The real kicker, the one that finally started to pry my eyes open, happened about a week before I found out everything. It was a Saturday. I'd finished a big electrical job early and came home hoping to surprise her, maybe take her out for a nice dinner, a rare treat. Her car was gone. I figured she was at the library, as she often was on weekends. I called her cell, and it went straight to voicemail, which was unusual. She was usually good about answering my calls. I tried again an hour later, same thing. A little flicker of annoyance, then worry. I texted, "Hey, where are you? Everything okay?" No reply. Hours passed. The sun started to set. That little flicker of worry was now a growing unease in the pit of my stomach. Around 8 p.m., her car finally pulled into the driveway. She walked in, looking flustered, her hair a little messy, cheeks flushed. "Oh my God, Mark, I'm so sorry," she said, rushing her words. My phone died, and I was at this special review session with Professor Davies and a few others. It ran way longer than expected, and he doesn't allow phones in his intensive sessions to avoid distractions. I totally lost track of time. Professor Davies again. The name seemed to be a constant refrain in our lives. The no phones rule sounded a bit extreme, but then again, what did I know about intensive university review sessions? He was brilliant, remember? Maybe brilliant people had eccentric rules. She seemed genuinely apologetic, a little breathless. But there was something in her eyes, a nervousness that didn't quite sit right. And again, that faint, almost imperceptible trace of that same expensive cologne. This time, when I didn't immediately buy her explanation, when my silence stretched a bit too long, she got defensive. "What? You don't believe me? I'm out there busting my butt to graduate with honors, to get a good teaching job so we can have a better future, and you're going to give me the third degree because my phone died and a professor is actually dedicated to his students." The weak card again. It was her trump card, and it usually worked. It made me feel guilty, like I was the one being unreasonable, untrusting. I backed down, like I always did. But that night, sleep eluded me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene, her words, her flushed face. The excuses were starting to feel thin, worn out from overuse. The image of her, so agitated, the persistent, out-of-place scent of that cologne. It all swirled in my mind, creating a muddy, unsettling picture. I was still miles away from the truth, but I was no longer entirely blind. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground starting to crumble beneath my feet, and a part of me, deep down, knew it. I just wasn't ready to fall. Not yet. The thought of what I might find if I looked too closely was more terrifying than the slow erosion of my peace of mind. The actual discovery, when it came, wasn't a dramatic confrontation, no hired private investigator. No smoking gun photo slid under my door. It was far more mundane, and in a way, far more brutal. It was a Tuesday morning, about 2 weeks after her graduation. She had landed a teaching job at a local high school, due to start in the fall, thanks in no small part, she'd said, to a glowing recommendation from Professor Davies. We were supposed to be celebrating this new chapter, the culmination of all our efforts. I was in my home office, which was really just a converted spare bedroom, trying to sort out some invoices for my business. Sarah was out, supposedly meeting some of her old college friends for lunch. Her old laptop, the one she'd used throughout her degree, was sitting on the corner of my desk. She'd gotten a new, sleeker model as a graduation gift from her parents and had told me I could wipe the old one and use it for parts or donate it. I hadn't gotten around to it yet. I needed a particular file, a spreadsheet I thought I might have backed up onto it a long time ago. So, I powered it on. It was slow, clunky, filled with 4 years of her academic life. As it booted up, her email client opened automatically. It was still logged into her university account, the one she barely used now that she had graduated. I wasn't trying to snoop, honestly. I was just impatient, waiting for the desktop to load so I could search for my file. And then I saw it. An email thread, right at the top of her inbox. The sender? Alistair Davies. The subject? Us. My blood ran cold. Us. Not your grades, not recommendation letter, not academic query. Just us. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I clicked on it. My hands were shaking. I told myself it could be anything. Maybe us referred to a group project, a collaborative paper, anything but what my gut was screaming it was. But the words that filled the screen, they were like individual shards of glass, each one embedding itself deeper into my soul. The emails, oh God, the emails. There were dozens of them, stretching back months, maybe even a year or more if I'd bothered to dig deeper, but I didn't need to. The most recent ones were enough. They were intimate, sickeningly so. Full of shared private jokes I didn't understand, references to meetings I knew nothing about, discussions of their future that clearly didn't include me. He called her my brilliant muse, my beautiful Sarah. She called him Alistair, not Professor Davies. She talked about the thrill of their clandestine meetings, the passion that was missing from her life, presumably with me. There were phrases like, "I can't wait to feel your arms around me again," and "Last night was incredible, I'm still thinking about it." Last night? What happened last night? We'd had dinner together, watched TV. She'd seemed normal. Or had she? Was I so blind? One email from him, dated just before her graduation, stood out. "Nearly there, my love. Soon you'll be free of that obligation, and we can finally start planning properly." He doesn't suspect a thing, does he? He doesn't suspect a thing. That was me. I was he, the obligation. My stomach lurched. I felt like I was going to be sick right there, all over the invoices for the work I'd done to pay for the life that allowed her to meet this man, to betray me so comprehensively. I scrolled further, a masochistic urge compelling me onward. There were mentions of his office, of late-night grading sessions that were clearly anything but. There were details about gifts he'd given her, a silk scarf I'd never seen, a rare edition of a poetry book I vaguely remembered her showing me, claiming she'd found it at a used bookstore. Lies. All lies. Every shared smile, every word of gratitude for my support, Every "I love you" from the past year, maybe longer, replayed in my mind, now tainted, twisted into something grotesque. The woman I loved, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, didn't exist. She was a phantom, a carefully constructed illusion. And the reality? The reality was this sordid, cheap affair with her professor, funded by my sweat and my unwavering, stupid faith in her. I felt the room spin. The words on the screen blurred. It wasn't just the affair itself, the physical betrayal. It was the depth of the deception, the calculated cruelty of it. She had looked me in the eye, day after day, while carrying on this secret life. She had let me pour my heart, my energy, my money into her future, knowing that future didn't include me in the way I believed. The degree I had paid for, the one that was supposed to be our ticket to a better life, was, in fact, her ticket out, her escape route into the arms of another man. The irony was a bitter pill, so large I could barely swallow. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence of the house pressing in on me, the glowing screen of the laptop illuminating my own personal hell. The man who didn't suspect a thing now knew everything, and the world as I knew it had just ended. The physical shock was overwhelming. I remember my hands going numb first, then a cold wave washing over my entire body, despite the warmth of the late spring day. My breath hitched, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might pass out. I leaned forward, resting my head in my hands, the cheap plastic of the old laptop cool against my forehead. The emails were still there, burning into my retinas, a testament to a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical assault. Each word, each tenderly typed endearment between them, was a fresh stab. My brilliant muse. He called her his muse. I, her husband, the one who'd moved heaven and earth to give her the space and opportunity to even be in the same damn city as this parasite. I was just the obligation. The dull, dependable workhorse funding her intellectual and, apparently, sexual awakening. I wanted to smash something, to scream, to tear the house apart. But I was frozen, a statue of disbelief and agony. The sheer audacity of it, the calculated, long-term deception. How many times had she come home from a late study session smelling faintly of him? How many times had she feigned stress over exams while the real drama was her juggling two lives? Every memory of the past few years began to curdle, to twist into something ugly. Her excitement over certain classes, her praise for Professor Davies' brilliance, her sudden need for new clothes, for more privacy. It all clicked into place with a sickening clarity. I wasn't just a cuckold. I was the architect of my own humiliation, the willing sponsor of my wife's affair. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen, the words blurring into a meaningless jumble of black and white. Eventually, a raw, guttural sound escaped my lips, something between a sob and a roar. The pain was a living thing, coiling in my gut, squeezing my chest until I could barely breathe. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about the complete and utter destruction of my reality. The woman I married, the life we built, the sacrifices I'd made, all of it felt like a sham, a cruel joke played at my expense. The trust, the bedrock of any marriage, had been systematically pulverized. I thought about her graduation day, just a couple of weeks prior. The pride I'd felt, watching her walk across that stage. The way her family, my family, had praised us, our teamwork, our dedication. Davies had been there, hadn't he? Smirking from the sidelines, probably. The thought made bile rise in my throat. He had shaken my hand at the reception, a smug, condescending look in his eyes that I'd misinterpreted at the time as academic pride. Now, I saw it for what it was, the look of a man who had taken something precious from me and was enjoying the charade. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage, so intense it almost eclipsed the pain. I wanted to find him, Toohey. I didn't know what. But the image of his face, his name, Alistair Davies, was seared into my brain. Slowly, mechanically, I started to move. I closed the laptop, the click echoing in the oppressive silence of the room. I needed proof, concrete proof that couldn't be denied or explained away. With trembling fingers, I reopened the email client. I forwarded the entire damning thread to my own email address. Then, I went further. I started looking through her document folders. More evidence. Poetry he'd written for her, drafts of her papers with his overly familiar and suggestive comments in the margins, comments that went far beyond academic feedback. Your insights here are as captivating as your eyes, one read. Another, on a particularly passionate essay about tragic heroines, simply said, "You understand passion, Sarah. We both do." It was a digital chronicle of their affair, laid bare on the hard drive I had paid for, on the laptop she used while sitting across the dinner table from me, pretending everything was fine. I found a folder named ASP. My mind, slow and thick with shock, took a moment to decipher it. Alistair. Sarah. P. Passion? Pictures? I clicked. My breath caught. It wasn't explicit in a pornographic way, not the kind of thing that would get flagged, but it was intimate. Selfies of them together, clearly not in a classroom. Him with his arm around her, both of them beaming, in what looked like a park, a cozy restaurant booth, even one that looked like it was taken in his office, her perched on the edge of his desk, laughing. There were pictures of gifts, too. The silk scarf I'd never seen her wear. A delicate silver bracelet. Things I, her husband, had no knowledge of. Each image was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. I saved everything. Copied it all onto a flash drive, my movements precise, almost robotic. It was as if a different part of me had taken over, a colder, more methodical part, while the emotional core of me was just shattering. The sound of her car pulling into the driveway an hour later was like a gunshot in the quiet. I was sitting in the living room, the flash drive heavy in my pocket, the laptop back on my desk in the office, closed, as if untouched. My mind was a maelstrom of conflicting impulses. Part of me wanted to scream at her the moment she walked through the door, to throw the evidence in her face, to watch her crumble. Another part, a smaller, wounded part, almost wanted her to deny it, to somehow, magically, make it all a terrible misunderstanding. But the methodical part, the one that had copied the files, knew that was impossible. The evidence was irrefutable. She came in, humming a little tune, a shopping bag from a boutique swinging from her hand. "Hey, you'll never guess who I ran into." She began, then stopped. She must have seen it on my face. The color drained from hers. The breezy cheerfulness evaporated, replaced by a guarded, wary look. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice suddenly small. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just looked at her, really looked at her, trying to reconcile the woman standing before me, the woman I had loved for nearly a decade, with the stranger in those emails, the adulteress in those pictures. They were the same person. And that was the hardest part to accept. "How was lunch with your friends?" I asked, my voice eerily calm, almost detached. She blinked, thrown by the mundane question. "It was fine. Good. Why? Who did you see?" I pressed, still calm, but it was the calmness of a coiled snake. "Oh, you know, Lisa, Megan, a few others from the program," she said, a little too quickly. A lie. Another lie, so easily delivered. I knew from the email she'd been with him. One of the messages I'd skimmed from Davies had mentioned looking forward to their long lunch. "That's funny," I said, my voice starting to tremble, the control slipping. "Because I was just on your old laptop, looking for a file. Your university email was still logged in." Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The hand holding the shopping bag tightened, knuckles turning white. She knew. She knew what I'd found. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a countdown to the explosion. "Mark." She started, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't." I cut her off, my voice finally cracking, the dam of my composure breaking. "Don't you dare, Sarah." The next few hours were a blur of accusations, denials, and then, finally, the ugly, unvarnished truth. It all came pouring out, her justifications, her blame shifting, her pathetic attempts to minimize the betrayal. But the words that echoed loudest in the ensuing wreckage were the ones I'd read on that screen. He doesn't suspect a thing. End obligation. My role in her grand plan. The unwitting financier of her affair. The raw wound of that realization was just beginning to fester. The initial shock was morphing into a searing, white-hot anger, and a steely resolve was starting to form in its place. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. She had thanked me for her degree by destroying my life. Now, it was my turn to issue a response. The confrontation was ugly. There's no other word for it. As soon as I mentioned the emails, the carefully constructed composure she'd walked in with shattered like cheap glass. First came the denials, weak and stumbling. What emails? I don't know what you're talking about. You must have misunderstood. It's not what it looks like. Classic lines straight out of the cheater's handbook. But I had the flash drive in my pocket, a tangible weight of her deceit. I didn't even have to show it to her yet. The specificity of my knowledge, the fact that I knew about Alistair, about their private language, about specific non-academic meetings, was enough to make her realize the game was up. The color completely drained from her face. She sank onto the sofa as if her legs could no longer support her. Then came the tears. Not tears of remorse, not at first. They were tears of frustration, of being caught. Okay, fine, she finally spat out, her voice laced with an anger that stunned me. It happened. Are you happy now? Happy? Did she seriously think I'd be happy discovering my marriage was a sham, that the woman I devoted my life to was sleeping with her professor, the very man whose classes I was indirectly funding? The audacity was breathtaking. I just stared at her, the rage building inside me like a pressure cooker. Happy. I finally choked out. You think this makes me happy, Sarah? You've spent the last year, maybe more, lying to me, sneaking around, treating me like an idiot. You let me work my fingers to the bone, sacrifice everything for your dream, while you were screwing this Davies character. And you ask me if I'm happy? Her defense, when it came, was a pathetic tapestry of blame-shifting and self-pity. She felt neglected, she said. I was always working, always tired. She felt intellectually stifled with me. Professor Davies, Alistair, understood her in a way I never could. He stimulated her mind. He made her feel alive. Each excuse was like another twist of the knife. I was working to pay for her goddamn degree, the one that put her in constant contact with this intellectual Lothario. I had listened to her talk about her classes, her ideas, for hours, even when I was exhausted, even when I didn't fully understand the academic jargon. I had supported her, encouraged her, celebrated her successes. And this was my reward? To be told I was too dull, too unstimulating? So you decide to sleep with your professor? I countered, my voice dangerously low. The man whose career, by the way, is built on a position of trust and authority over students like you? Did that stimulate your intellect too, Sarah? The ethics of it all? She flinched at that. The mention of ethics, of the power imbalance, clearly struck a nerve. But she quickly recovered, falling back on the I was lonely defense. He listened to me, she insisted. He saw me, and I didn't? I shot back. I was just the walking ATM, was I? The guy who kept the roof over your head and paid your tuition fees while you were out finding yourself with another man. The argument raged for hours. It swung from furious shouting matches to periods of icy, hate-filled silence. She tried to turn it around on me, accusing me of snooping, of violating her privacy by looking at her emails. The sheer hypocrisy was staggering. I had stumbled upon her betrayal while trying to use a piece of equipment I owned that was in my house after she told me I could wipe it. She had actively, premeditatedly, and repeatedly violated the sanctity of our marriage vows. There was no comparison. The practicalities, the immediate, ugly realities of the situation started to sink in. This wasn't just an emotional apocalypse, it was a logistical nightmare. Our house, our finances, our intertwined lives How do you even begin to untangle that level of wreckage? What now, Sarah? I asked, the anger momentarily giving way to a bone-deep weariness. What the hell do we do now? She looked small then, lost. The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a dawning comprehension of the abyss she'd opened up before us. I don't know, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you, Mark. That line, that old chestnut. You never wanted to hurt me? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. What did you think would happen, Sarah? Did you think I'd just never find out? That you could keep your little secret life going indefinitely while I played the role of the oblivious, supportive husband? Did you think those emails, those pictures, would magically disappear? She started to cry again, this time with what looked like genuine distress, maybe even a flicker of shame. She talked about being confused, about being flattered by his attention. She said it started as an intellectual connection, a mentorship, and then it just happened. It didn't just happen. It was a series of choices, thousands of them. Every lie she told, every secret meeting, every clandestine message, those were all choices. Choices she made, actively and repeatedly, over a prolonged period. There was no, oops, I tripped and fell into his bed about it. The thought of him, Professor Alistair Davies, loomed large. This man, who had abused his position, who had preyed on a student, who had callously inserted himself into my marriage. My anger towards Sarah was immense, a universe of pain. But the rage I felt for him was different. It was colder, sharper, more focused. He was the predator, the manipulator. She was a willing participant, yes, and I wouldn't absolve her of that. But he was the one who held the power, the authority. He was the one who should have known better, who had a professional and ethical duty to maintain boundaries. He hadn't just slept with my wife. He'd violated a sacred trust that universities are supposed to uphold. As the night wore on, and the initial emotional storm began to subside, a grim determination started to settle in my heart. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not just Sarah, but him too. He wouldn't just continue his life, his career, unscathed, while mine lay in ruins. The degree I'd paid for had facilitated this betrayal. The institution where he taught had, unwittingly or not, provided the backdrop. There had to be consequences. Real consequences. For both of them. The fight with Sarah eventually fizzled out into an exhausted, bitter truce. There were no easy answers, no clear path forward. The only thing that was crystal clear was that our marriage, as I knew it, was over. It was a casualty of her choices, a victim of her affair. I told her I needed space. I needed to think. I couldn't even stand to be in the same room as her. The air was too thick with her lies. That night, I slept in the spare room, the one that had been my home office, the scene of the discovery. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying every conversation, every suspicious incident, every loving gesture from her that now felt like a calculated deception. The emotional damage was profound. I felt hollowed out, a shell of my former self. The man who had proudly stood by his wife, who had believed in love and commitment and sacrifice, was gone. In his place was someone I didn't recognize, someone filled with a cold fury and a desperate need for, not revenge, not exactly, justice. Yes, that was the word. I needed justice. And I would get it. The days that followed were a blur of suffocating silence and unspoken accusations. Sarah tiptoed around the house like a ghost, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She tried to initiate conversations, tentative little peace offerings. Can I get you anything, Mark? Or, I'm so sorry, but I couldn't bring myself to engage. Her apologies felt hollow, insufficient. Sorry for what? Sorry she got caught? Sorry she blew up our lives? The words were meaningless against the mountain of her deceit. I moved into the spare room permanently, if you could call sleeping on an old air mattress amidst boxes of my old work tools moving in. It was a miserable existence, but it was preferable to sharing a bed with her, to smelling her scent on the pillows, to feeling the warmth of the body that had betrayed me. The house, our home, felt contaminated. Every object, every photograph, every shared memory was now a source of pain, a reminder of what I had lost, of how thoroughly I had been duped. I barely ate. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind a relentless tormentor, replaying the emails, the images, her tear-streaked, lying face. I lost weight. My friends and family noticed, of course. I'm not one for big emotional displays, but the change in me was palpable. I was withdrawn, irritable, a shadow of my usual self. When they asked what was wrong, I just mumbled something about work stress. I wasn't ready to share the humiliating truth, not yet. The shame was a heavy cloak, and I wore it constantly. The practicalities of the situation were almost as overwhelming as the emotional fallout. We had a mortgage, joint bank accounts, shared bills. Our lives were so deeply intertwined that the thought of separating them felt like trying to unscramble an egg. And then there was the issue of her degree, the one I'd poured tens of thousands of dollars into. The irony was sickening. I had funded her escape into the arms of another man. I had paid for the very education that she claimed made me seem intellectually inferior to her new lover. The injustice of it all gnawed at me, fueling the cold fire of my anger. I started doing some research, late at night, when the house was finally still and Sarah was presumably asleep, or perhaps texting her brilliant muse. I looked into divorce laws in our state. I looked into university codes of conduct, policies regarding student-faculty relationships. The more I read, the clearer my path became. This wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about accountability. Professor Alistair Davies. The name echoed in my mind. He wasn't just some random guy she'd met. He was her professor. He held a position of power and influence. He had an ethical responsibility, a professional duty. And he had shredded it, just as casually as he'd shredded my life. I started to form a plan. Not a plan for revenge in the traditional, destructive sense. I wasn't going to slash his tires or send anonymous letters. That wasn't my style, and frankly, it wouldn't achieve what I truly wanted, which was systemic justice. No, my plan was more methodical, more surgical. I wanted to expose him, to hold him accountable within the very system he had exploited. I wanted the university to know what kind of man they had on their payroll, what kind of mentor he truly was. And Sarah? Her consequences would be different, more personal, but no less severe. The loss of our marriage, the public shame that was inevitably coming, the knowledge that her actions had irrevocably destroyed the life we had built, that would be her burden to bear. But I also started thinking about the money. The thousands upon thousands of dollars I had invested in her future, a future she had decided would not include me. Was there a way to recoup some of that? It seemed unlikely, a long shot. Marital assets get divided, sure, but recouping tuition for a degree that was now a symbol of betrayal? That was a different beast altogether. Still, the thought lingered. It wasn't just about the money itself. It was about the principle. It was about the fundamental unfairness of it all. One evening, about a week after the discovery, Sarah tried to talk to me again. She found me in the kitchen, staring blankly at a pile of mail. "Mark, we need to talk about this," she said, her voice soft, pleading. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you more than words can say. But there has to be a way through this. For us to salvage something." "Salvage what, Sarah?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Our marriage? It's dead. You killed it. You and Davies. What's left to salvage?" "But I still love you," she said, tears welling in her eyes. That, of all things, almost made me laugh. "Love me? You have a strange way of showing it. Was it love when you were writing those emails? Was it love when you were sneaking off to meet him? Was it love when you looked me in the eye and lied, day after day?" She recoiled as if struck. "It was complicated," she began. "No, it's not complicated, Sarah," I interrupted, my voice rising. "It's simple. You made choices. You betrayed me. You betrayed our vows. You betrayed every sacrifice I ever made for you. There's nothing complicated about that. I saw something flicker in her eyes then, a hint of the fight returning, a spark of defiance. "So that's it then?" she asked. "You're just going to throw away 10 years of our lives?" "I didn't throw it away, Sarah," I said, my voice hardening. "You did. You threw it away for a cheap thrill with your professor. You valued that more than you valued me, more than you valued us. Now you get to live with that choice. And so do I." The conversation ended there. There was nothing more to say. The lines had been drawn. She had made her bed, and now she was going to have to lie in it. And I was going to make sure that Professor Alistair Davies lay in his too. The decision was made. I was going to contact the university. I had the proof. The emails, the photos, the timeline. It was all neatly organized on that flash drive, a ticking time bomb. The question was no longer if I would do it, but when and how. I needed to be strategic. I needed to ensure it had the maximum impact, not just for Davies, but for the institution that had allowed him to operate. The emotional damage was done, a gaping wound that would take years to heal, if ever. But perhaps, just perhaps, through some measure of justice, I could begin to reclaim some small piece of my dignity, my self-respect. The fight for my future, a future without Sarah, a future I had never envisioned, was just beginning. The decision to go after Professor Davies wasn't born out of a single moment of clarity, but rather a slow, simmering burn of indignation that finally ignited into a controlled fire. It was one thing for Sarah to betray me. That was a deeply personal wound, a gutting of our shared history. But Davies, he represented something more insidious. He had abused a position of power, violated the trust inherent in the student-teacher relationship, and used his academic standing as a cloak for his predatory behavior. He hadn't just cuckolded me. He'd made a mockery of the very institution that employed him, the institution whose degree I had financed with years of backbreaking work. My initial fury had been a wild, untamed beast, wanting to lash out, to cause immediate, visible pain. But as the days passed, a colder, more calculating resolve took its place. I realized that a screaming match or a fist fight wouldn't achieve anything lasting. It would give him the satisfaction of painting me as the unhinged, jealous husband. No, what Davies deserved was a professional reckoning, a public stripping away of his carefully cultivated image of the brilliant academic. I wanted to hit him where it would hurt the most, his reputation, his career that I spent hours meticulously preparing my case, like a prosecutor building an indictment. The flash drive was my star witness. I organized the emails chronologically, highlighting the most damning passages, the ones that explicitly detailed their physical relationship, their clandestine meetings, his manipulative endearments, and their shared contempt for me, the obligation. I cross-referenced the dates of these emails with Sarah's supposed study sessions or late nights at the library. The pattern was undeniable, a clear timeline of deceit. The photos, too, were damning, not just of them together in compromising, non-academic settings, but also of the gifts he'd given her, little tokens of their affair that she'd tried to pass off as insignificant purchases or finds. I even found a few of his fawning comments on her submitted papers, not just praise for her intellect, but overly personal, suggestive remarks that, in the context of everything else, painted a clear picture of grooming and inappropriate intimacy. I wrote a formal letter addressed to the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences and also to the university's Ethics Committee or Office of Professional Conduct. I researched the correct departments. My letter was calm, factual, and devastatingly precise. I laid out the timeline of my wife's enrollment, my financial support for her education, and then, without excessive emotional language, I detailed the evidence of Professor Davies' unethical and predatory relationship with her, his student, during the period she was under his academic supervision and for which I was paying tuition. I emphasized the abuse of power, the breach of trust, and the profound impact this had not only on me, but also on the integrity of the academic environment he was supposed to foster. I attached copies of the key emails and a selection of the photographs. I made it clear I had more evidence, should they require it. The hardest part was deciding whether to inform Sarah of my intentions. Part of me wanted her to be blindsided, to feel the same shock and helplessness I had felt. But another, perhaps more pragmatic part, knew that involving her, or at least making her aware, might be strategically necessary. If the university investigated, they would undoubtedly want to speak with her. Her cooperation, or lack thereof, could be crucial. In the end, I decided to tell her, not to ask for her permission, but to inform her of an action I was already resolved to take. I found her in the living room, staring blankly at the television. I stood before her, the prepared envelope in my hand. "I'm sending this to the university tomorrow," I said, my voice devoid of inflection. I handed her a copy of the letter, without the attached evidence. She read it, her face growing paler with each sentence. When she finished, she looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "You can't do this, Mark," she whispered. "This will destroy him. It will destroy me too." "Destroy you?" I replied, a bitter laugh escaping me. "You seem to have done a pretty good job of destroying us all on your own, Sarah. As for him, he's a grown man. He made his choices. He cultivated a relationship with his student, your professor, while you were married and he knew you were married. He's about to find out that choices have consequences." "But my career," she pleaded. "I just got the teaching job. If this comes out, you should have thought of that before you decided to sleep with your professor," I said coldly. "Did you think about my life, my feelings, when you were sneaking around with him? Did you think about the sacrifices I made for that degree you now hold? The degree that got you that job? The degree that put you in his classroom?" She started to cry, the predictable tears. "He'll deny it. They'll say I'm lying, that I'm a scorned wife." "I have proof, Sarah," I said, tapping the original envelope. "Emails, pictures, timelines. It's all there. He won't be able to deny it. And frankly, whether you cooperate with the university or not is up to you. But they will investigate. And his career, at this institution at least, is very likely over." She begged. She pleaded. She tried to appeal to the love I once had for her. She said Davies had meant nothing, that it was a mistake, that she loved me. It was a desperate, pathetic performance, and it only solidified my resolve. Her concern wasn't for the ethical breach or for the pain she'd caused me. Her primary concern was for herself, for her reputation, and perhaps a little for her lover. The man she claimed meant nothing. The next morning, I mailed the package via registered post, with return receipt requested. I sent copies to the dean, the head of the English department, Davies' department, and the university ethics office. Then I waited. The waiting was agony. Every phone call, every email, I expected it to be them. Days turned into a week. The silence from the university was deafening, but the silence in our house was even worse. Sarah was a wreck. She barely spoke, moving through the house like a phantom. The fear of exposure, of the impending implosion of her carefully constructed new life, was clearly eating her alive. I, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of calm. I had done what I had to do. The ball was no longer in my court. I had spoken my truth, presented my evidence. Now it was up to the institution to uphold its own stated values. During this time, I also consulted a divorce lawyer. I laid out the whole sordid story, including the financial sacrifices I'd made for Sarah's education. The lawyer was sympathetic but realistic. Recouping tuition fees in a divorce was a long shot, almost unheard of, unless there was some kind of pre-existing written agreement, which there wasn't. However, the adultery, especially with the power imbalance involving her professor, could potentially influence spousal support discussions or the division of assets, depending on our state's laws. It wasn't about bankrupting Sarah. It was about a fair and just settlement that acknowledged the financial contributions I had made under what were, essentially, false pretenses. The primary goal, however, remained Davies. His downfall was the justice I craved most intensely. I imagined him being called into the dean's office, confronted with the evidence of his sleazy affair. I imagined the panic in his eyes, the crumbling of his arrogant facade. That thought, more than anything, sustained me through those tense days of waiting. The revenge, if you could call it that, wasn't about fiery explosions. It was about a slow, methodical dismantling of a lie, and the exposure of a man who thought he was untouchable. The call finally came nearly 2 weeks after I'd sent the letters. It was from a Ms. Henderson, an administrator in the university provost's office, specializing in faculty conduct investigations. Her tone was serious, professional. She confirmed receipt of my complaint and the supporting documentation. She informed me that the university was taking the allegations very seriously and had launched a formal investigation into Professor Alastair Davies' conduct. She asked if I would be willing to meet with her and an investigator to discuss the matter further and to provide any additional information I might have. I agreed immediately. We set a meeting for the following week. After I hung up, a wave of grim satisfaction washed over me. It was happening. The gears of justice, however slowly, were turning. I didn't tell Sarah about the call immediately. I let her stew in her own anxiety for a few more days. When I did finally mention it, casually, that I had a meeting scheduled with the university investigators, the look of sheer terror on her face was something I would not soon forget. The reality of her situation, the full weight of the consequences of her actions, seemed to finally be crashing down on her. Her affair wasn't just a private mistake anymore. It was about to become a public scandal, a career-ending catastrophe for her lover, and a permanent stain on her own reputation. The brilliant muse was about to face the music, and so was her Svengali professor. The satisfying part wasn't just the impending justice for Davies. It was watching Sarah realize that the world didn't revolve around her desires, that actions, especially deceitful and hurtful ones, have profound and far-reaching consequences. Her carefully constructed narrative of victimhood and intellectual yearning was crumbling under the harsh light of accountability. And I was the one holding the lamp. The meeting with Miss Henderson and another stern-faced gentleman, a university investigator named Mr. Cole, took place in a sterile conference room on campus. It felt strange to be there, in the heart of the institution that had been the backdrop for so much of my pain and Sarah's betrayal. I recounted my story, sticking to the facts, presenting the timeline, and answering their questions as calmly and thoroughly as I could. I didn't need to embellish or get overly emotional. The evidence spoke for itself. They listened intently, took copious notes, and occasionally asked clarifying questions. They were particularly interested in any indication that Professor Davies had initiated or exploited the power differential, and any evidence that the relationship had occurred while Sarah was a student and he was in a position to grade or otherwise influence her academic standing. My documented emails and his suggestive comments on her papers were key here. They asked about Sarah's willingness to cooperate. I told them honestly that she was terrified and ashamed, but that the truth was the truth, regardless of her current feelings. I made it clear that my primary concern was Professor Davies' abuse of his position. Ms. Henderson assured me that the university had very strict policies regarding consensual relationships between faculty and students, especially where there was a supervisory or evaluative role. If the allegations were substantiated, she said, the consequences for Professor Davies would be severe, ranging from suspension to termination of employment. Leaving that meeting, I felt a sense of grim accomplishment. I had done everything in my power. The rest was up to them. The fallout was quicker and more decisive than I had anticipated. Within a month, rumors started circulating within the university community. Then, an official, albeit vaguely worded, announcement was made. Professor Alastair Davies had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation. Shortly after that, he quietly resigned. There was no public fanfare, no dramatic firing. Universities often prefer to handle such matters discreetly to avoid scandal. But the message was clear. His career at that institution was over. I later heard through the grapevine, amazing how news travels, that he tried to fight it, denied everything, even attempted to paint Sarah as the pursuer, the fantasist. But the evidence I had provided, combined with what I can only assume was Sarah's eventual, reluctant corroboration of the basic facts, likely to save herself from further implication or accusations of academic dishonesty if she lied to investigators, was too overwhelming. He was gone. His brilliance had led him straight out the door. As for Sarah, the university didn't take any direct action against her degree, as the relationship, however unethical on his part, was deemed consensual from her side, albeit under a cloud of his influence. However, the social and professional fallout for her was significant. Her new teaching job at the high school suddenly became untenable. News of the scandal, even in its muted form, reached the school district. Her glowing recommendation from Professor Davies was now a liability, a mark of shame. She resigned before she was pushed, her dream career ending before it even truly began. The degree I paid for now hung on our wall, or rather, the wall of the house I was soon to be the sole occupant of, as a monument to folly and betrayal. Our divorce was finalized a few months later. It was surprisingly amicable, mostly because Sarah was too broken and too disgraced to fight. She didn't contest my claim for a significantly larger portion of the marital assets, a silent acknowledgement, perhaps, of the financial devastation her actions had wrought upon my contributions to her now tainted education. She moved out, taking her clothes, her books, and her shame with her. I heard she went to stay with her sister in another state, trying to piece together some semblance of a life. Did I feel a sense of triumph? Not exactly. There was a grim satisfaction, yes, in seeing Davies face professional consequences and Sarah understanding the full weight of her choices. But triumph implies joy, and there was no joy in any of this. There was just a vast, aching emptiness where my marriage, my trust, and my dreams for the future used to be. The revenge, if that's what it was, felt hollow in some ways. It didn't undo the pain. It didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't bring back the years I'd lost or the love I thought I had. But it did bring a measure of justice. It brought accountability. And in that, there was a certain, stark closure. The chapter of my life with Sarah and the chapter of being the supportive, self-sacrificing husband was definitively, irrevocably over. Now, the daunting task was to figure out what the next chapter would look like and who I was meant to be in it. Looking back, nearly 2 years later, the raw, jagged edges of the betrayal have softened, but the scars remain. They're a part of me now, a permanent reminder of a painful chapter, but also a testament to my ability to survive, to rebuild. Life is different, quieter. The house, once filled with the phantom echoes of laughter and lies, is now just my space. I've slowly reclaimed it, redecorating, filling it with things that bring me peace, not painful memories. My business is doing well. The energy I once poured into supporting Sarah's dreams, I now invest in myself, in my own growth, and in my work, which, ironically, has always been a source of honest satisfaction. I'm not the same man I was. That naive, trusting part of me is gone, probably forever. I'm more cautious now, more guarded with my heart and my resources. Some might see that as cynical, but I see it as realistic, a lesson learned in the harshest way imaginable. The experience forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself, too. Was I too focused on being the provider, the enabler, that I missed the warning signs? Did my own need to be the supportive husband blind me to the growing distance between us? Perhaps. Relationships are complex, and blame is rarely one-sided, even in cases of such clear-cut betrayal. But while I can acknowledge my own potential blind spots, the responsibility for the affair, for the lies, for the devastation, rests squarely with Sarah and Davies. I occasionally hear snippets about Sarah. She's apparently working in an administrative role somewhere, far from any classroom. Her dreams of being a teacher, the ones I'd so diligently funded, are dust. There's a certain tragic irony in that, but I find I no longer take any satisfaction from her misfortune. Her life is her own to navigate now, her consequences her own to bear. As for Professor Davies, his academic career seems to have stalled completely. A man once lauded for his brilliance is now a cautionary tale, his name likely whispered in university hallways as a synonym for ethical failure. Justice, in its own quiet way, prevailed. For a long time, I wrestled with bitterness. It was a heavy cloak, and it threatened to suffocate any chance of future happiness. But eventually, I realized that holding on to that bitterness was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It was only hurting me. Slowly, painstakingly, I began the process of letting go. Not forgetting, never forgetting, but releasing the anger, the need for retribution beyond what had already occurred. Therapy helped. Talking it through with a neutral third party allowed me to process the grief, the anger, the profound sense of loss without judgment. It helped me understand that her betrayal was about her failings, her insecurities, her choices, not a reflection of my worth as a person or a husband. Have I dated? A little. Tentatively. It's hard to trust again, to open yourself up to that level of vulnerability. But I haven't given up on the idea of companionship, of love. I know now what the red flags look like, and I also know my own worth better than I ever did before. I learned that my value isn't tied to how much I can provide for someone else or how much I sacrifice. My value is inherent. The experience, as devastating as it was, ultimately forced me to rebuild my life on a foundation of self-respect and an unshakable understanding of what I will and will not tolerate. There's a strength in that, a resilience I didn't know I possessed. I'm no longer just the man whose wife betrayed him after he paid for her degree. I'm the man who survived that, who sought justice, and who is now, slowly but surely, building a new life, a life on his own terms. The pain is a part of my story, yes, but it's not the whole story. And it certainly won't be the end of it. Sharing this, putting it out there, it's not about reopening old wounds or seeking pity. It's about acknowledging what happened, owning my part in the narrative, the good husband, the fool, the survivor, the one who fought back in his own way, and maybe, just maybe, helping someone else who's going through something similar feel a little less alone. Betrayal is a dark and lonely road, but it doesn't have to be the final destination. Looking back, I realize I lost a part of myself, but I also found something stronger. If you've ever been betrayed, know this: you're not alone, and healing is possible. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories like this one. Until next time, take care of yourself.